about how this got started. And it started 50 years ago. Can you imagine that? 50 years has gone by. But Clarissa Anderson Gibbs was getting ready to
keep it closed,
to donate the Anderson family papers to St. Augustine Historical Society. And she wanted somebody to put them in order. And so she said, how about me? And I was just a newcomer here in town, but I was honored to do it. And I thought, this is going to be fun. And it was. You get to read other people's mail, you know, and sometimes you would open up a letter and it came in an envelope that had by steamboat with lightning bolts on it. And I thought, wow, that's pretty modern. But you'd open it and some sand would come out, and the sand was there because the ink had been blotted with that sand. And I thought, boy, this is really getting into it. But anyway, the papers were ultimately donated to the St. Augustine Historical Society. You can go look at them down there. And along the way, she said, how about if we write a book about the Anderson family? And I thought, oh, that'll be good. But she wanted it to be done in a hurry. And I thought, okay. So this was kind of one of the easiest, funnest books I ever wrote, because I could just kind of skim through and get the easy stuff. Plus, I had the family papers, and that helped a lot. So anyway, so the book came out in 1978 by the Historical Society, and it's still around. Okay, Presbyterian Church and the Anderson family, and they were involved in it almost from the beginning. Florida became a possession of the United States in 1821, and it was, of course, a Catholic area. The Episcopalians were the first ones to get their act together, so Trinity Church down on the plaza got started just a little bit before the Presbyterians did. But by 1824, the Presbyterians had organized themselves in association with the Georgia Presbytery. And William McWeir, whose name is on the sign out front, is credited with being the founding pastor of the church. The church didn't have a building, so they met in what's today called the Governor's House. And I think in those days it was probably just called Government House or something like that, because that was about the only place where you had a hall big enough for churches to meet. And for a little while, the Presbyterians and the Methodists had fistfights over who got to use the hall on Sunday mornings. But the Presbyterians decided to build their own church at 262 South St. George Street, which is pretty far down on St. George Street. And the building was started in 1825. The footprint was 45 feet by 65 feet. And by 1830, the church was completed enough that people could meet there. And interestingly, the coquina stone from that church is in the pillars out front of this church today. And I think that's a nice touch to save a little bit of that. Well, the Andersons arrived towards the end of the 1820s in St. Augustine. Came from New York City. You had the first Dr. Andrew Anderson and his wife, Mary. Mary wrote to her sister up north in 1831, said she missed her church up north. God has been pleased to place me here where I trust he has got some work yet for me to do in this barren soil. She said the church was in pitiable condition, as is religion in general in St. Augustine. Well, a daughter, Mary, was born in 1830. Mary Anderson, the wife of Dr. Anderson, was baptized here in 1831. And in 1832, Dr. Anderson and Mary were admitted as members of the church. Dr. Anderson was elected a trustee of the church in 1832, one of 4 trustees. And interestingly, the church raised money by selling pews, a good old-fashioned tradition. You know, everybody had their own pew that they had paid for. One of the big reform movements of the day was temperance, and Dr. Anderson was interested in that. He was the president of the local temperance society. Dr. Anderson wrote his brother Smith in New York City, said, we've got cholera here because we drink too much. And he said, if they would only banish rum in all its forms, I believe they would all die of old age or starvation, for we are the laziest pack in Christendom. Good old St. Augustine. They got in a fight over the Protestant cemetery, which had been established just outside the city gate, because Protestants couldn't be buried in town. And ultimately, Dr. Anderson and the Presbyterians got control of it. And I wish I knew when it was called the Huguenot Cemetery. Do you know when the name Huguenot got attached to it? Interesting. One thing from Dr. Anderson, he defended a enslaved black man against some charges that had been brought against him, which is an old Anderson family tradition, the supporters of the black population in town. Dr. Anderson became an elder of the church in 1839. He wrote his brother in New York letters that were filled with religious sentiments. And he said he thanked God that some of the people in town had come over to the Lord's side. When his daughter Mary traveled to New York to visit Smith, he said, don't let her go to the theater. All right, good idea, good idea. Mary Anderson died in 1837 at the young age of 42. Andrew wrote his brother Smith, said she was resigned to the will of our Heavenly Father. She named each family member, said farewell to them, and said, I hope we meet on the other side sometime, not to be separated again. Well, interesting story. Clarissa Fairbanks was brought down from up north to be the governess of Dr. Anderson's 2 young children. But at the time, there was a strong suspicion that the first Mrs. Anderson had picked out Clarissa Fairbanks as the next Mrs. Anderson. And that's the way it worked out. Dr. Anderson wrote to Smith and said, well, thank God that he's given me an appropriate mate. And so he married his second wife, whose name was Clarissa Fairbanks. And from that union came Andrew Anderson II in 1839. The doctor delivered the baby, and the family slaves were in attendance. And he said, so it was, all in all, as a mother, doctor, nurses, it was totally a family affair. And young Andrew was baptized a couple of weeks after his birth in 1839. And then yellow fever appeared in town. I think our bout with COVID gave us a little inkling of what it was like back in the days when you didn't know what caused diseases, you didn't know how to cure diseases, you didn't know what to do about it, and quarantines were about the only thing you could do. Keep infected people out of your town, if at all possible. And Dr. Anderson ministered to the people who had yellow fever and then contracted it himself and was among the 50 people in town who died of yellow fever in 1839. He was described as a pillar of the Presbyterian Church. Well, okay. William McClure came in as the new minister of the Presbyterian Church. Clarissa Anderson wrote, "Our society is dropping off one after another, either by death or removal, so that there are but few left, and we are all so poor that I fear we shall not be able to do much for our minister." And that's one of the things about St. Augustine. It was not a wealthy town. She liked Reverend McClure, said he tells good stories. Does Hunter tell good stories? Yeah, okay. And attracted a good crowd. The girls' Sunday school raised enough money for a pulpit. She thought it made the church look better with the pulpit. They even opened up their doors to the to the Methodists to help the Methodists get started here. And added that some of the soldiers from St. Francis Barracks were joining the congregation. Mrs. Anderson had the library for the church and wanted to make it available to everybody. And then they added a bell tower to the church. And you all know the bell tower story? You know, it was not constructed very well. And in 1860, at 4 a.m. in the morning, with a loud crash, the tower fell. And the bell inside was damaged. It was set up north to be repaired and then disappeared at sea when the ship sank, bringing it back. And then there was another bell constructed, which has the date 1866 on it. And local historian, where's that bell now? And so here it is. So is the tower standing up pretty well? Okay, all right. Okay, yeah. Well, okay, so Clarissa Anderson, raising her son, daughter Mary went off and got married to somebody in South Carolina, and she pretty much vanishes from St. Augustine history. She hired a tutor. She didn't want her young son, Andrew, to go into town where he might run into bad boys and hear bad words. Okay, sounds like a good mother. And then to further his education, they went off to Europe together and traveled. As you might imagine, she wrote back and said she disapproved of the French. Pretty much everything about the French she disapproved of. She didn't like the Belgians either, which she attributed to Roman Catholicism. She said, wherever you find Roman Catholicism, the people are all benighted and poor. And the French danced, sure sign of, yes. They went on to Germany. She kind of liked the Germans better, except that the Germans have this big failing of drinking beer, and she said, "It's a shame that the wealthiest people are the brewers in Germany." So anyway, so they came back from Europe and set up housekeeping here in town. Pretty much the church would go somnolent in the summer times, but then in the winters, when you got some sick Yankees coming to town, church attendance would pick up a bit because you had both people and people who had some money. Clarissa starts, this is great because Andrew goes off to Princeton. And Princeton was considered a northern university, a college in those days, that was safe for Southern boys. They wouldn't get radicalized if they went to some place like Harvard, you know. But Princeton, it's in New Jersey, just on the fringes of the North. And so that was a good place for him. And the good part about it was we have the letters back and forth. And, well, actually mostly those that she wrote to him. And she's admonishing him, don't go out on rowdy sleigh rides, don't drink. He takes up smoking. She says, "Oh, that filthy habit, why are you doing that?" But also, she says, "You haven't made a confession of your faith in Christ yet." And he says, you know, you're taking a chance. You're putting your soul in peril by putting this off. And then Andrew had formed a relationship with a local girl named Nellie Baldwin. And Nellie Baldwin died of typhoid. And Clarissa writes to Andrew and says, "Don't mention typhoid because it would hurt the reputation of town." And then she said, "The death of Nellie should remind you that life is short. Here is your time to join your life with Christ's. Take a lesson from her." Now, the interesting thing is, Andrew writes back and says, "I don't think I could ever fall in love with anybody again, because all it does is it just leads to heartbreak." And so he didn't marry for the longest time. He was noted as a bachelor. Well, okay, let's see. We are now to the great turning point in American history, the arrival of the Civil War. And Andrew had to make a decision as to what he was going to do. And at first, he signed up with the local militia unit, which was going into Confederate service. But within weeks, he changed his mind and hired a substitute, which you could do both North and South. You could hire a substitute if you didn't want to serve yourself. And then took off for New York City and managed to escape through the Union blockade. He was being chased by Confederates and Unionists. He made it to Cuba and then to New York City, and then enrolled in the College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York City, and following in his father's footsteps to become a physician. The Presbyterian Church had to shut down during the Civil War. Union troops stole the pews that people had paid for out of the church, and so there were no sessions there. After the Civil War, the Presbyterians reclaimed their church, tried to get it back in shape. Interestingly, they withdrew from the Georgia Presbytery and affiliated with the Presbytery of Philadelphia. So they were they were joining the Yankee side after the war. I'll digress here for a second. Oh, no, I won't. Anyway, I can't think of her name all of a sudden. Lived on St. George Street. She and her dad always walked to the Pumpkin Methodist Church and walked right past Grace. And she asked her dad, why don't we go to the Methodist church that's right next to us? And his answer was, Grace Methodist Church is the Yankee Methodists, and the Pumpkin Methodists are the Southern Methodists. And I thought, oh, okay. And that was modern times. Andrew Anderson, 1865. The war had just been over for a couple of months. Andrew Anderson, young man, 26 years old, became a trustee, one of the 5 men who were trustees of the Presbyterian Church. He would serve on the board for 59 years, 50 of them as chairman of the board. And interestingly, he wasn't a member of the church. So, chairman of the board, but not a member. And evidently, he had reservations about the creed. He wasn't sure he was going to swear to all those things in the creed, supposedly. But anyway, for whatever the reasons, he wouldn't join up. 1877, Anderson and the U.S. Army got the erection of a Presbyterian chapel right on the west end of what we like to think of as the plaza, right there on Cordova Street, where there's a fountain today. For a brief period of time, there was a wooden Presbyterian chapel there. Well, about that time, Henry Flagler arrives, and Dr. Anderson becomes one of Henry Flagler's closest associates. They may have met in New York City. Don't know, can't prove that, but Henry Flagler was living in New York City by this time. Andrew Anderson owned a property in New York City, had relatives in New York City, so they may have met up there, but almost from the start, when Flagler came to St. Augustine, Dr. Anderson was one of his closest associates. Flagler spent some time in Markland House, Anderson's home, before he got started. And the idea of Flagler building a church for the Presbyterians came up. And in fact, Flagler writes a letter. He says, here, I've already built a church for the Methodists and haven't done anything for the Presbyterians yet. But finally, the church got built, and here we are. In March of 1890, the church was dedicated. Andrew Anderson and the trustees and the elders were in the front row, and, oh, is that pew number 20? But anyway, Henry Flagler was back there a ways, a modest kind of guy. Now, of course, I earlier alluded to the acoustics. The acoustics were bad from the start. Carrere and Hastings, you'll have to invite Leslie here to talk about the architecture of the church. But the acoustics were bad. Dr. Anderson tried to figure out ways to deal with it, painting the walls with vibration absorbing paint, stringing piano wires under the dome. Nothing really helped. By the way, young Clarissa, I haven't gotten her born yet, but when she would sit in church, she said she would look up and she said, oh, God's living up there somewhere in the dome. She said, but then they painted the dome, and she said, oh, I don't think God would live in the dome. That's the new paint color. That was a story Mrs. Anderson told me when I was doing her papers. John McGonigal became the pastor in 1893. Flagler liked him. McGonigal married a local girl here from St. Augustine. Okay, what? Stained glass windows, Flagler commissioned those in 1901, left it up to Dr. Anderson and Reverend McGonigal to pick out what the glass would be, and they came up with the Apostles' Creed, and I think the glass is pretty good, right? Yeah, Herman Schledermunt did it, and his daughter was here in town 10 years ago and came to look at the glass and all. She's pretty proud of what he had done. Okay, let's see. New minister, Reverend McGonigal resigned and went to Miami. Dr. Anderson and Dr. DeWitt Webb, another physician in town, co-chaired the committee to find a new pastor. Anderson went to New York to interview James Coffin Stout. He was invited to come down, and Stout did. He lasted until 1913 and presided over Henry Flagler's funeral here in this church. Clarissa said her mom, Mrs. Anderson, was crazy about pastors. And she said this disgusted her dad very much, that she was so much in love with various pastors. Barton Bigler became the new pastor, and he would be pastor here for 21 years. And he finally persuaded Dr. Anderson to make a confession of faith and to join the church, which he did just prior to his death. He passed away in 1924 in his house, Markland. The funeral was here. And Dr. Anderson left in his will $25,000 for the maintenance of the church. Excuse me, I'm going to have to cough for a second. See, that just makes talk about typhoid and it just makes it a little more authentic. Let's see. Dr. Anderson also gave $50,000 for an organ at the University of Florida, which is at the tower there on the Plaza of the Americas at the University of Florida. One of the first selection played from the organ was "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God," which was one of Dr. Anderson's favorites. Pretty much everybody likes that. Some of the things that Clarissa Anderson gave to the church, when she was living in a modest condo on Anastasia Island just north of the Bridge of Lions, and I'd sit down with my little tape recorder to record what she had to say, and she had the City of God under her coffee table, and she said, you know, I like to bring it out every now and then, the book, which had been printed in 1475. And she said, I like to just look at it sometimes. And I kind of looked at it, and there was no title page to it. I thought it just starts off. And I thought, well, and the title page, such as there is at the end. And I thought, well, my wife would probably like that because she always reads murder mysteries by reading the end first, you know. But anyway, and then the painting of St. Augustine, these had been purchased by John Peck, another local doctor, when he was an American minister to Spain back in the 1800s. And so two visible. Where's the book? Is it in one of your alcoves here? Okay. All right. Okay, well, let's see. Clarissa died in 1990 at the age of 94. Did you know Clarissa? Yeah. She was a good old gal. Okay. Well, and since I've killed off Clarissa now, and I think that's a good place to stop. Okay. Now, this is the okay. I was a little longer than brief.
Brief is relative.
Okay. All right, questions, comments? I'll repeat the question if it's, yeah, if somebody. I don't see any dead cats or tomatoes headed this way, but.
So did she give the portrait in the book to the church? Is that, I was trying to make
Yes.
that connection. Okay.
Yes. Those were her donations.
She mailed the book in a cereal box. Did you know that? She mailed the book to us. She had it, first off, she had it rebound, which you don't ever do with old books. But then she mailed it to us in a cereal box because she thought that if anybody intercepted the package, they would think there's nothing valuable because why would they send it in a cereal box from Nova Scotia?
Yeah, the Anderson family, the descendants, still have a home in Nova Scotia. Yeah.
Where did Clarissa live at the end? Where was her final home? Here in St. Augustine.
Yeah, as far as I know, the final place she was living was in that little condo on Anastasia Island, just north of the Bridge Alliance. She had sold Markland years earlier to get out from under paying the property taxes. And then I should add, she helped, when Flagler College got control of Markland House, she helped fix it up, donated a little money, not a lot, but also was able to tell the college what the interior looked like. And she even contributed, if you're ever there in the music room, the back room on the east side, there is a lampshade that is really hideous. And Clarissa made that herself. She said, this is, which is, because she remembered that's what it looked like from her childhood back in late Victorian times. Yeah. Mary? No, yeah.
Which one was always had a passion for the pastors?
Yeah, the second Dr. Anderson's. Oh, I didn't get. The first Dr. Anderson's widow, Clarissa. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Dr. Anderson's mom. And he finally did get married. When he was 56 years old, he finally married. And so anyway. Okay. Well, all right. Thank you. You've been a good audience. Thank you for inviting me. And I asked the Historical Society, I said, loan me some books and I'll see if I can sell them. these are, well, anyway, the Historical Society has had a supply ever since 1978. All right, thank you again.